All right, so I want to dive into Philadelphia Phillies pitcher Cristopher Sanchez. Sanchez is having a great season and truthfully has been one of the top pitchers in baseball for the last couple years. So the process that I go through when I'm evaluating a pitcher's performance is honestly pretty straightforward and pretty simple. I'm looking at his strikeouts, his walks, and his damage. If he's doing good in at least two of those three categories, he's probably having a really good season. If he's dominating all three categories, now we're talking about being a top 5, top 10 Cy Young Award winner that year. So when we look at Cristopher Sanchez's strikeout rate, his walk numbers, and his home run totals, we want to make sure that we're splitting this up by batter handedness. Overall is fine to look at just to get a good picture of how he's doing as a whole, but we want to know how is he doing against lefties and righties specifically. That way, if there's a mismatch or there's a big discrepancy between the two, we can then start to program and plan what he needs to improve, whether it's his pitch usage, whether it's getting in zone more, or it's a specific pitch type that he needs to develop a little bit more for a righty or a lefty. So when we dive into Sanchez here, we can see his strikeout rate against lefties is significantly higher at 37.1% compared to 24.7 against righties. Now, 24.7 is still really good against right-handed batters, especially considering that Sanchez is a sinker ball pitcher. Typically, sinker guys against opposite-handed hitters aren't going to get as many strikeouts unless they have a serious weapon that they can use against those opposite-handed hitters, which he does with that changeup, as we'll get into here in a second. Big league average for strikeouts is 22.5% roughly. As we dive into walk rate here, we can see he is crushing it on the walk rate. Now, you might be looking at this against lefties and righties and see a significant difference between that 1.8 and that 6.8. But keep in mind that big league average is around 8.5. So even though righties is higher than lefties, it's still in a really good place. And I wouldn't necessarily sound any alarm to say that, okay, he's walking way more righties. We need to put a big emphasis on command. When in reality, his walk rate and his strikeout rate against righties are still within really good ranges. He's just really, really dominating left-handed batters. And you can also see it here at the top how it has batters faced, 167 lefties compared to 542 righties. I don't think that's an accident. I think when teams are facing him, they're trying to go heavy right-handed batters because they know how devastating he is against lefties. But the truth of the matter is he's almost as good against righties because of that changeup that he has. Home run total, so big league average home run percentage is around 3%, 2.9 to 3%, give or take. So really, he's not going to have a lot of homers to either, especially lefties at 0.6, and even at 2.4 against righties, still below average. With him being, like I said, a sinker ball guy, it makes sense. He's getting more ground balls. He's not going to be giving up as many fly balls. Therefore, he's not going to give up as many home runs. A couple of process stats I like to look at in regards to these numbers is first pitch strikes and early and ahead. So first pitch strikes, big league average is around 60, 61%. He's well above that, especially against lefties at 73 and 61 against righties. Early and ahead is one of my favorite stats. This is accounting for how often the ball is put in play on 3 pitches or less, or how often you are getting to an 0-2 or a 1-2 count. Big league average for this is about 72, 73%. So he's way above that on lefties with 87%, and then against righties at 73%. So really when I'm looking at this and I'm breaking him down against lefties and righties, clearly when we compare him left on left, like he's unhittable. They're not touching him, which makes sense why lefties just aren't playing when he pitches. Righties, I look at him, I'm like, that's a really solid pitcher. Is that Cy Young numbers, 24.7 K rate, 6.8 walk, just below, league average for home run rate? No, but that's a really, really successful pitcher. And then when you put this as a whole, combining it, now we are talking about, a top 5 Cy Young winner this year. So now diving into his arsenal, I alluded to him being a sinker ball guy. So you can see he has that sinker at 4.3 vert with 18 inches of run. So really good sinker, especially from that slot at 5.9. So really close to a 6-foot release height and is getting well above average sink and run. Average sinker in the big leagues is about 7 vert and 14 to 15 horizontal from closer to like a 5.7, 5.8 release height. So with him being a little bit higher slot and still getting more sink, that pitch is playing so steep that he's just inducing a ton of ground balls. And then you pair that with his elite velo of 95 plus with that sinker from the left side, it makes it play even better. The changeup is his bread and butter. He uses it a ton, as we'll dive into here for his pitch usage here in a bit. But really good pitch. Keep in mind, sinker guys, their changeup spread from a movement standpoint isn't going to be as significant as, your carry four-seam guy who has a good changeup or a splitter. There's not going to be as big of a gap with those sinker guys because they're already getting so much side spin and creating depth with that sinker. It's just really tough to separate them. Now you can, like I would say like Sanchez, for example, if he wanted to get more depth, we probably could. We would just have to sacrifice a little bit of horizontal. That's the strategy that Logan Webb of the Giants goes with. So Logan Webb's changeup is like 0 vert, 15 horizontal, and his changeup is in that like -5, -6 vert range, but it's only 9 or 10 horizontal. So it just kind of depends on what you're going for. The method that Sanchez has gone for is a fairly similar profile to his sinker. But he just executes it so well. He sells it with arm speed. Like there's more than just the movement of a pitch, especially when it comes to a changeup. There's a lot of deception involved that can, allow you to dominate batters as well. Then he has his slider at 86. This is more of like a death ball, I would say. So it's, -4 vert, essentially 1 horizontal, a little bit depthier of a gyro slider than typical. Really good weapon for him. He's, uses it a decent amount. We're going to get into some of my recommendations for him if he wants to take his game even to the next level. I think that slider could be used a little bit more, and I think it's a really good weapon for him. So now when we dive into things, we want to, like I said, always make sure we're dividing left versus right. So we want to see how is he attacking his lefties, what do his in-zone numbers look like, what are his whiff numbers, and how are his pitches performing overall. So against lefties, he's primarily relying on that sinker-slider combo. So 58% sinkers, 29% sliders. And because his changeup's so good, he's even throwing that, 12.5% left on left, which I don't know what average is off the top of my head, but I would assume on average a left on left changeup is used probably close to 4 or 5% of the time. But because his is such a weapon, he's using it at a 12.5% clip. So yes, he's dominating with 2 pitches primarily, but that third pitch, the changeup, against lefties is used just enough to keep it in the back of the mind of hitters. Just absolutely pounds the zone with that sinker, 64%. Big league average for a fastball is 53%. So just really pounds the zone, 80% strikes. Now, it doesn't get a ton of whiffs. He actually gets a lot of whiffs for a sinker. Average for a sinker is closer to that 13, 14% mark. And he's getting, about 20% whiffs, 34% CSW. So CSW is called strikes plus whiffs divided by total pitches. Big league average is 28%. It's going to change, a little bit depending on the pitch type, but 34% is very elite for a sinker. And then PV100 is a stat that we created with, pitching coach U and Pearl player development. So this is essentially a run value stat, but we're stripping out the context of runners on base and outs, but it is factoring in count. So the reason we wanted to strip out runners as well as the count is because you could throw 2 pitches that get the same result, but if it happens with a runner on third base versus nobody on base, it's going to grade them a little bit differently. And we kind of just wanted to strip that context to truly know, like, how is this pitch performing in general? So for this, average is around 0. It's going to depend on the pitch type. Negative value is good for a pitcher. Positive is good for a batter. So we can see here, like, everything's negative. The sinker grades out the worst at -0.1, but still pretty good for a sinker. Changeup doesn't throw it a ton, but when he does, it really works left on left at -7, and then the slider's great at -3. Barrel percentage, so it's kind of interesting. Big league average is about 17, 18% for barrel percentage. 10% for the sinker, really good. The changeup is getting barreled 40% of the time. So, and this is only accounting for balls put in play. So when it does get put in play, it tends to be hit decently hard. Now, it seems like it's either a swing and a miss or it's a barrel. It's kind of like the split that it's going with. His whiff rate is 64%, is crazy high. Doesn't throw it in zone a ton, which I think is fine with the way he's using it. It's only 29% in zone, but 70% strike. So he is getting an incredible amount of chase on that changeup, which is really incredible. Let me go to the slider. I'm sorry, not 70%. Oh yeah, 70% strike. Sorry. Just got confused for a second on the whiff and the strike rate. And then the slider, 60% strike, only 38% in zone. Once again, gets a lot of chase. 55% whiff, really, really good. Only getting barreled 5% of the time. So, like, if we're looking at the overall performance of these pitches, like, I would say that slider is probably the go-to pitch for him. And honestly, could probably up the usage a little bit. Like, 58% sinker usage is pretty heavy. If he could even just drop down 10% of that and, apply a few more change-ups and, like, definitely get that slider closer to 35%, I think it could work really well. Now, keep that in mind or take it with a grain of salt considering how much he is dominating left-handed batters. That's really not probably what his focus needs to be. You're probably just going to roll with what's been working. And if things change, maybe you deviate the usage a little bit. Righties is really where there is some potential to get a little bit better. He throws that sinker 39% of the time, changeup 44%, slider 16. So I think the changeup usage is probably in a good spot. I mean, it's his best pitch by far. He's throwing it a ton. Once you get above 40%, like now we're getting to territory where hitters can potentially sit on it. But when it's a really good pitch, it's a good pitch, right? But there is a threshold, I think, of once we get to that 45, 50% plus, we're getting into that sitting on it territory and kind of eliminating pitches. So I think that's in a good spot. He's definitely at the cap for that, I would say. Sinker usage 39%, slider 16. When we break down, whiff rate, CSW, and PV 100, like I think there's definitely opportunity to use that slider more. I would honestly probably eliminate 10% of the sinker and apply that to the slider. Like if we can get to 25% slider usage against righties, I think it's not only going to help him in general against righties, but I think it's actually going to make his changeup play even better because now he's going to be able to play the combo of that slider, breaking down and into a righty and then throwing the changeup off of it. I think it could be a really good combination for him, and just kind of takes into account pitches that are breaking into a batter a little bit more. I mean, essentially, if you do the math on that, I mean, 84% of his pitches are running away from a right-handed batter. So if you can just throw a few more that are breaking in on a guy or in on a righty, I think that could be beneficial for him. And as I get into some takeaways, there is some pitch type suggestions and maybe some pitch design things that he could start to incorporate to take his game to the next level against right-handed batters as well. Pitch location by pitch type in hand. So versus lefties on the left versus righties on the right. We got sinkers at the top, sliders, and then changeups. So sinkers are lefties down and in. Kind of interesting he's throwing it down and in since that's typically like a lefty sweet spot, but it's worked really well for him. Sliders down away, changeups pretty much just middle down. Righties, he tries to go down and away, and then he'll throw that slider back door, and then just super consistent at hammering that changeup down and away. So I think like that's kind of the combo he's been going with is more sinkers in, changeups away off of that. So even though he doesn't have a pitch that's moving, hard in often, and even the slider, he's going back door more. I think he's almost trying to use that sinker as his keeping them honest pitch to get inside on it to open up the outside corner for that changeup. Some future considerations, like things that I think could be beneficial for him. The first thing that came to mind is adding a cutter for right-handed batters. So, I mean, it's very rare nowadays that you see a guy that's only a 3-pitch mix guy with a sinker, changeup, and slider, and to be dominating as much as he is. Like, if you were to see a 3-pitch guy, it would typically be more of a 4-seam guy, and then he probably has a changeup that's depthy and has maybe a gyro slider. But to have a 3-pitch mix starter that's doing what he's doing with the sinker being the only type of fastball that he has is actually incredible. But I think to make him even more devastating to right-handed batters is adding a cutter. So I have it kind of circled here around that 10 vert, 0 horizontal mark. That's kind of in a perfect world scenario. If he could throw something there that's 90 to 92 or even a little bit harder, that'd be incredible. Now, I think I would settle for something even closer to, 5 vert and maybe a little bit of horizontal, and it's, in between like a true cutter and the slider that he has. But I think the important part is it needs to be hard and it needs to have relative cut to that sinker. So even if it's like circling, a little bit arm side, it's 10 vert and it's maybe, 2 to 4 inches of horizontal arm side, like you look at that and you'd be like, oh, that's a crappy fastball at 10 and -4. But you got to remember, it's all about relationship to what the other pitches are doing. When they're used to seeing his sinker hammering down into the arm side, then he throws this fastball here. Even though it looks flat or bad on paper, it's going to have perceived cut relative to everything else that he has and is going to appear to have more vert than everything that he has. So something that would be more of a test, trial and error to see what works, but I think a cutter would be a really good addition for him. And then I already alluded to this last point, but the increasing slider usage to 25% against right-handed batters I think would be really useful. Can eliminate some of that sinker usage. And then if we are talking about adding a cutter, the cutter can even come into play. And if you want to get the slider closer to 20%, you drop down the sinker, probably 15%, honestly. So it's now in the 25% range, and he's throwing a cutter 15% of the time. I think there's a little bit of trial and error there to see what works. But I think it could be a really good option for him. And then keep in mind, I'm kind of going back to the cutter now. He throws that cutter. Think about that pairing that he's going to now have with a changeup off of a cutter. So if he's in that 10 to 0 range, 10 vert, 0 horizontal range, and then throws that changeup off of it, look at that movement separation and the perceived horizontal break that it's going to have relative to that cutter. I just think that adding that pitch is going to open up so many doors, even if it isn't necessarily on paper, a great pitch, or even if it doesn't perform incredibly well, as long as it performs average, I think it's actually going to make everything else play better. So therefore, it's going to become an above average pitch because of the complement it does for the rest of the arsenal. So that's my thoughts on Cristopher Sanchez. He's been an incredible pitcher, really ever since he broke into the league. And it's been cool to see, a guy dominate like he has from the left side with only 3 pitches. And I think these are a couple things that could potentially take his game to the next level.